Come and join the adventures of the Magical Space Pussycats, exploring bookish horizons and having in-depth lady chats. Doobie-doobie-doo-doo.
Welcome back, Pussycats, to the 5th episode of Magical Space Pussycats, your favorite speculative fiction chat, show, and book club. Today on the episode, we are going to talk about a new development in the Hugo Awards. We're going to talk about a new potential category, as well as the winners for the British Fantasy Awards. And then we are going to jump into our discussion of Kindred by Octavia Butler. As always, I am Chelsea Outlaw. I am coming to you guys from the United States, and I am joined by two lovely ladies who I will let introduce themselves.
I'm Elizabeth and I'm in Wales.
Hey guys, I am Kaitlin and I'm coming to you from England.
Alright. Well, as we kind of explained getting into the show, we are going to start by talking about the kind of new things that are going on, which we'll start with the new Hugo category for those of you guys who haven't seen it or who aren't really tapped into the Hugos in between the time they're over and the time you nominate again. Worldcon 75 is going to be kind of the first trial run of a new category. They're going to introduce the new Best Series category, which if it goes well and they get good nominations and people seem to like it, seems like it will become a permanent fixture as of 2018.
They've done this before with the best graphic work, which is now a standard on the ballot, but it happened a few years ago. I can't even remember when. But that was a new thing and people liked it, so maybe they'll like this.
Yeah, and so this category, the kind of big picture or the, in order to be nominated for this category, the award goes to a multi-volume science fiction or fantasy story, which has to be unified in plot, characters, etc. So obviously, a series of books, which has appeared in at least 3 volumes consisting of a total of at least 240,000 words, and at least one of the volumes has to be published in the year it was nominated. So in this case, 2016. So that is how it works. Those are the rules. That's what it takes to be nominated. We have some thoughts
we
how
have
that's going
many
to work.
thoughts on this.
Thoughts from you ladies. What are you guys thinking about how this is going to work?
I was never a fan of the concept in the first place. I felt like it was something that was kind of brought in as a reaction to the furore about the Robert Jordan thing getting on the ballot and then not winning back in 2014.
Yeah.
But then I'm not a huge series reader. I don't read huge epic fantasy series, so maybe. Yeah. Kaitlin, do you have thoughts?
I mean, I like the idea of it, but I think from hearing you guys talk about the rules before we started recording just now, it sounds like there needs to be some ironing out of things that maybe wouldn't be eligible by their rules currently that should be eligible. But I do read epic fantasy series which are usually ridiculously long, and I think that you've got to give credit to people who can manage to complete a series that is ridiculously long and keep it interesting as you go. And I don't think there are many authors who do that. I think a lot of people try, but I think there are some authors who do it incredibly well. Robin Hobb. Yeah. And I think that they should be recognised. And I think, for example, Robin Hobb's latest book, when it comes out, the third one in the Fitz and the Fool series, is probably not going to win the fantasy standalone novel category because it's so far in a series, but it could win this one.
Yeah.
And I think it would be eligible, and I think it would make sense for her to win this because she is an established fantasy author who does really, really good fantasy. So in my opinion, she should be recognised too. But as you were talking about with Le Guin and people like that from the past who maybe weren't eligible, not such a fair award for people who don't write quite as epic, quite as long books.
Yeah, so what Kaitlin is talking about is we had a bit of a chat beforehand where I was desperately trying to do maths, not my strong point.
Numbers are hard.
Challenging.
So the requirements for the award is that the series must be at least 240,000 words to be nominated. And I was thinking about Le Guin's novels, particularly the Hainish cycle, which includes The Dispossessed and The Left Hand of Darkness, some of her most famous books. But they
Which are only a couple hundred pages a piece.
Yeah.
They're not super long.
Yeah, exactly. Planet of Exile is just over 100 pages. And according to an estimate that I found on the internet, always the most reliable, you can estimate about 250 to 300 words per page. So a 55,000 word book would be about 200 pages, which means that Le Guin's books, by the time they were 3 or 4 books in, would be nowhere near the 240,000. I'm even dubious whether she would have hit it by the time she finished the Hainish cycle. There's quite a few of them, but some of them are very short, and they do go over the requirement for best novella, which is 40,000 words, which would be, you know, you're not talking many pages, like barely over 100 pages to classify for best novel. Yet you've got to get to 240,000 words, which would be like 800. It's like 1,200 pages or something like that.
Yeah, they're crazy long books. And it's interesting because, as we've kind of already indicated, like, it skews one, like you were talking about, incredibly long books. So we're talking about your George R. R. Martins, your Robert Jordans, you know, posthumously, your Brandon Sandersons.
Yeah, totally.
Things like that. And with that, you're skewing so heavily towards that epic fantasy end of the spectrum. There, you know, there are so few, not none, but so few epic science fiction series that could qualify for something like this, that while I think that it is a reflection of the field and makes room on the ballot for potential other authors, the way they have it structured now with their word counts and stuff, you're only going to be rewarding a handful of people over and over and over again each time they have a book published in that calendar year. Like,
exactly,
when the next Stormlight book comes out, that will win this category. Like, when Winds of Winter comes out, that will win this category. Like, I would put money on it now, and those books, who knows when they're coming.
Yeah.
But this is that category for that book.
And how many trilogies are there that are going to come in just under that word count? Like, that is a huge word count for a trilogy.
I mean, you couldn't put Hunger Games in that category. Something like the Hunger Games doesn't cap 250,000, which, you know, should the Hunger Games win a Hugo, that's a different conversation. But, you know, was a best-selling, very well-known science fiction dystopian series. And so
it's true.
You exclude more than you include.
And I think what you were saying about sort of excluding people, it is going to be a repetition of the people who have these ongoing series. It's going to be at least, you know, if someone new wants to come in and try for this award, they've got to write 2 books and then a third one before they can even be considered for this award.
I mean,
so
you don't go in assuming that you're going to go for one award. You just write.
No, but you know what I mean. Like, to be eligible for it at all, you've got to have written 2 previous books in a series that are really long, and then, you know, not many people are going to possibly come in with that intention. Or to come into it and think, oh, I might be eligible for this award. I think it is just
actually,
people.
I'm just thinking, Asimov's Foundation series, which was originally just the trilogy, and I think it was just the original trilogy that they awarded, won Best Series Ever or something. It's got a Hugo Award that has never been awarded before or since. It was just given one because everybody loved it and it hadn't won an individual one.
Yeah. And see, I wonder if...
There's no way it would have met 240,000 words. Those books are tiny.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you couldn't do something like that. Like, I wonder if the Hugos couldn't just make some kind of special, whenever it's necessary, award category for, like, hey, George R. R. Martin, when you finally finish The Song of Ice and Fire, here is your Lifetime Achievement Award. Or, you know, Sanderson, when you finally finish your 9 series cycle, whatever thing it is that you're doing with Mistborn now. Like, here is your rocket from the Hugos.
Yeah.
Like,
Patrick Rothfuss will get one when the 3rd book eventually
oh,
comes
absolutely.
out.
Scott Lynch will probably get one when he finally finishes up The Gentleman Bastard.
This is
cycle,
what I mean, though. It's like,
when.
I like all of these authors, but equally
Yeah.
I don't know if they're the best out there. They're just the most famous. And they're the most
Yeah.
famous because of various other factors that come into play, not always just because their books are really good, which I think they're good, but I don't think they're like the best of the best.
I
So-
think,
Well, because
I was gonna say, I think what we're concluding is that we see the benefits of it.
Yeah.
Because absolutely there are series that need to be awarded, and it would be good to see them because, like Kaitlin said, they're not getting those individual awards because it's hard if they're on the ballot and they're the like 7th book in a series to go back and read
like
all.
who's making that investment?
Yeah.
Like if you haven't been keeping up with that, I'm not reading 17 Robin Hobb books just to read the new one. I'll read them eventually.
Yeah.
Just not because she's nominated for the Hugo.
But the
That's a lot of
240,000 needs to be dropped. It needs to be dropped
or
severely
just like
down.
change it somehow to allow for science fiction that may
Well,
be shorter
if
and
the
just
cutoff for
generally
novella,
shorter.
if the cutoff for novella is up to novel is 40,000, then the logical point is 120,000.
Yeah.
Fours.
3 times that. Yeah.
So 120,000 plus, and at least 3 books.
Yeah.
Or keep the word count and just make it, you have to have more books in the series. You know, you have to have a minimum of 5 books in your series or 4,
But then we
or
cut
X
out
number.
trilogies.
Yeah, I
And
think that
trilogies
would
are
be-
kind of the
They're
mainstay
like the
of
foundation
series
of things.
That's
aren't
true.
they? So-
But that's true.
I
Yeah, we'd
think
have to drop
the
page
word count has to go down for
Yeah,
it to
it has
be
to- it
like
would
a
have to come
fair
down.
level playing field for people who do write shorter fiction, because short does not mean worse, and there's no logic behind it being a longer.
Well, and by the same turn, longer does not mean
no,
better.
exactly.
It'll
That's
be
what I
interesting
mean.
to
Like
see after the
none
first
of those
couple
things
of years.
sort of like there's no logic to that.
It'll be interesting. Like, once we award all the big series that are already ongoing, it'll be interesting to see what continues to get nominated. Because, like we've been saying, there's only so many books or series that could fit in this category to be nominated with.
Yeah,
so
I mean, there are loads out there, but of the ones that people know, there's not that many. And enough that,
Well,
they will get the
how
votes.
good are they? Yeah.
There's not that many. So it'll be interesting.
It'll be interesting. And it'll be interesting to see what the slates do with the new category.
Yeah,
and
and
stuff,
sort of
but
see the response from people about it all.
Yeah. Anyway, so we will keep an eye on it, and you guys going to Worldcon 75 will have to keep us posted as to.
Oh, I keep
Yeah.
remembering
How
I'm
it
going.
seems to
I'm
I know.
going.
Me too.
Yeah, that's both of you. Are you going, Kaitlin?
Yeah, I haven't booked
officially?
it all
Yeah.
yet, but I am going. I'm definitely going. I'm gonna book it all very soon. Just waiting for some money.
Yay! All right. Well, then, should we go ahead and talk about the British Fantasy Awards?
Yeah.
Since they've been awarded.
Yes, these were awarded very recently at the Fantasy Con, which was in Scarborough, the glamorous location. It's super goth. It's very Dracula, but yeah. Seaside towns. Anyway, that was on Sunday the 25th of September. They were announced at Fantasy Con, and they have a lot of categories in the British Fantasy Awards.
Yes, they do. Yes,
they do. I remember that from sitting through the awards ceremony in 2015 when I was there, and I was like, oh man, this goes on. It's a long one.
So, does anyone want to pick one out as a particular favourite that they think is very exciting?
I was very glad to see Letters to Tiptree win in Best Nonfiction.
Yes.
Because the ladies behind Letters to Tiptree are also the ladies behind the Galactic Suburbia podcast, of which we are all a favorite. We all enjoy listening to.
Yes.
Plus, they just missed being nominated for the Hugo. The stats for the Hugos came out, and because of stupid slate things, they just missed being nominated. So I'm glad to see him win there. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
So.
And I was very excited to see Zencho got Best Newcomer for Sorcerer to the Crown, which I read this year and loved. Last year? When did it come out? Anyway, whenever it came out, I loved
Whenever
it.
it was out. I don't know. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that one, actually.
Yeah, it was a fantastic book. I thought it brought in a lot of history of the UK that is often glossed over, and was really fun while it was doing it.
Yeah. Plus, you know, I'm always here for fantasy that's heavily weighted towards people of color and ladies.
Yes,
so
exactly.
I'm always here for that.
I agree.
So, and then the best fantasy novel went to Uprooted by Naomi Novik. So
Yeah, and I don't know if
there's
you guys
that.
have read the best novella nominee,
Which
The Pauper
one
Prince
was
and the
I
Eucalyptus
have actually,
Gin.
The
I
Pauper
actually like that
Prince,
one a lot,
yeah.
so at least it was one I'd read. That's always good.
yeah.
And that I know.
That
But
is
yeah, I
not
really
one I've
liked it.
read.
I thought it was like really
Yeah.
beautifully written. Actually, I think it's one of those very
Oh,
sort
it's
of
one of
lyrical,
the,
nice ones. A tour
It's one of
yeah.
the
It's one of the
novellas.
tour.com.
Yeah.
And they are killing it with
They
the
are
with
really
that.
killing it.
That line is really killing it. They're doing a good
Yeah,
job.
they basically decided to do novellas and are now winning every novella category
Every novella
going.
category ever.
Basically.
I mean, they've done novellas for a while, haven't they? But I think they've just like pushed it massively, and now it's
Yeah.
huge, and no one else seems to be doing it as much. So
Yeah.
So going
Good on
through
them.
a couple of going through a
and
couple
then
of the
I
others.
like
Oh, sorry.
I liked Raw Blood. Raw Blood won for best horror novel. Horror is my jam.
Oh.
really
yeah, I
like
saw
horror,
a few
so
people this weekend who picked that up when we went shopping. So it
Yeah.
definitely intrigues
It
me.
looks it's
but I am a bit
yeah,
scared.
It was really
'cause
good.
Horror is not my thing.
No, nor mine.
Yeah. And that one's a special kind of horror. If your stomach turns easily, that one may not be like the best choice for you.
I will stay away.
Yeah, I did really like The Death House. I was kind of hoping that one would win. I'm always here for like a haunted house story, so I was a little hoping that would win,
creepy.
but I did like Raw Blood. And as much as I love Night Vale, I think when I've talked about this before, I've said I would not have put Night Vale in a horror category necessarily. So as much as I like them, I'm glad it went to a slightly more horrific horror novel than
Yeah, I think that
the
horror is one
Cecil
of
and the
those
adorable
ones
Night
that
Vale. So.
British Fantasy Award tend to be quite big on the horror. So
Yes, they do.
yeah.
Oh goodness. All right. Well, any other thoughts on the BFAs, or is that
I think
are we
I
good?
think we're thought out.
We're good.
All thought out.
Yep, and we will link to the winner list in the show notes, so you can go check out all the other categories and see who ended up walking home with an award. All right, so now we are going to talk about Kindred by Octavia Butler. This was our science fiction Lady Vaults pick for the month. Yeah. Who wants to do we want to do a plot summary? Get everybody on the same
We
page?
can try. I'll try.
Okay.
Okay.
So the story follows a young woman from modern America. It was written in the 1970s, and she is from 1976, when she is suddenly transported back in time to the early 1800s. So she goes back to a couple of different periods, and in between returns home. And each time she is pulled in to be around this young man called Rufus, who is, she figures out eventually, is one of her direct ancestors, and he is a white slave-owning plantation holder's son. And each time he is in danger of losing his life, so she has to save him in order that she can be born later on. So the first time he's a child, the second time I would say he's like a preteen, the third time
he's like 10, 11.
the third time he's a teenager, and the fourth time he's like a grown man. And each time she stays longer and longer. And then one of the times her husband, Kevin, is pulled through with her, and he ends up having to stay in between when she gets sucked out, because time happens
Like, he
differently
gets
on
left
either
behind.
side.
Yeah.
And he gets left behind, and he experiences 5 years there, where she is at home for just a few days before she gets pulled back into the past. So they're having different experiences of the past and trying to survive there. But obviously Dana herself is black, and so when she goes back into the past, she has to live amongst the slaves and is treated as though she is a slave or a freed black. And Kevin is white, and so he is treated very differently. So we see the different things going on.
Very good.
a
Very
very-
good synopsis. I'm impressed.
Very well done, darling.
Thank
Very
you.
well done.
Okay.
Oh, goodness.
So,
Yeah. So this is an interesting book because this book is, I want to call it science fiction, but I also don't know how science fiction-y it is.
Yeah.
That's something we'll definitely dig into, but I think that the thing that stuck out to me is with her writing and with the way she structured the functioning of her time travel, Butler is able to do this really kind of surreal thing where you feel, along with Dana, super disoriented every time there is a time travel. So it takes a couple pages to reacclimate with Dana to that setting. And it's interesting because about halfway through, I don't know if this is a spoiler. This may be a spoiler. I'm not trying to spoil anything, but if you haven't read it and you want to,
Guys, we're doing spoilers all the way through this.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
there is
So-
no way of not doing
so
it.
this may be your time to come back and see us again. But about halfway through the book, the family and Rufus's father become aware of the fact that Dana time travels. And so it becomes this very interesting kind of conversation or story about inevitability and how time functions and how family functions. And it's just, it really, I don't know how I feel about this book. In case you can't tell by the hesitation in my voice, I'm still not entirely sure how I feel about this book, especially because there's the way that she makes slavery come alive is very interesting.
The world that she built is so vivid, like the way that slavery is described and how it functions in the society and how people function around it is so perfectly real when you're reading it. Like, that it's just insane. You're just dragged into this world like she is. Like, you're dragged back, you're disoriented, she's disoriented, and you kind of figure it out together. And I think that was one of the clever points of the storytelling of this weird time travel backwards thing. It was very good.
I think, was this a reread for you, Chelsea? Had you already read this one?
It was a reread, but I haven't read I read this book when I was probably in my junior year of high school, so I was probably like 16, 17.
Fair enough.
So in my memory, my memory stopped when Alice, is that her name?
Yeah,
the name
Alice.
of her relative?
Yeah.
When Alice hung herself. So that actually, in my mind, was where the book stopped. I don't know if it's because that was so traumatic for me the first time I read it, or because I just thought the rest of the ending was so not the way I wanted it to be that I just kind of blocked it out.
Maybe.
So the ending itself was very interesting, but I think what's crazy to me is that when I was reading it the first time when I was younger, it felt very much so like historical fiction, just that also had time travel in it. Whereas this time, I feel like the time travel and the way that the story functioned as a reflection of race relations and how it still felt so contemporary definitely hit harder this time around.
Yeah. I mean, the story has been held up and is used in classrooms a lot as a good way of getting people to think about the period when slavery was legal, about what that was actually like, and how, the households and the slaves functioned within a plantation and around a household, and what it was really like. Like, it's not glossed over at all. Although Butler herself has said that she made it not as bad as the actual
I was going to
slave
say that
accounts.
because I think when I was reading it, there were moments where I thought this could have been described in a much worse way than she is doing it. Like, it's brutal and it's horrible what's happening, but she doesn't go into the really vivid, gross details that she could have done, which would have turned it more into, like, I don't know, I think that would have drawn away from the story a bit. And I think it would have grossed people out more than necessary to tell this story.
Yeah,
And
I
the
think
story
that's...
still gets across the horrors and the tragedy of it without that.
Yeah.
And I think, well, and that's one of the things I think is interesting about like when you read an own voices book is so often the story is about kind of the power structures between the dominant and the non-dominant. So like in this case, the slave owners and the slaves. And I think that because we are with Dana and Dana is so fully enmeshed in the world of the slaves, we're able to get more into the power structures that occur in and amongst the minority group itself. So like field slave versus house slave, or slave in a northern state versus slave in the deep south, and kind of how those power structures
and the really interesting
reflect
thing as
their
well.
relationship with owners. Yeah, it is really, that's, I think, something that is really, that make this book hit so hard, is that it's not just about slave owner versus slave, it's about slaves versus slaves and that relationship. There are several scenes, well, there's one particular scene where Dana is sold out by a fellow slave. I got really, really fucking mad. Like, I got super mad. I was really, like, that was not okay with me.
I agree.
But we see that kind of thing happen, and it just adds another kind of layer to the kind of historical story we all know already, so...
The really kind of interesting thing for me was seeing that Dana and Kevin, her husband, they are a black and a white couple, like in the 1970s. And even in the 1970s, their families seem to have a little bit of resistance to them being together. So it's still not completely fine in people's eyes. But going back then to the 1800s and seeing her be chucked into this lifestyle over and over again, we see different kind of crazy interpretations of her coming in. Like, at times, the father of Rufus is saying, oh, well, you're just here to help my son. Like, there's no personality to her. She's not there for any other reason other than to help his son. Like, she's this person who's been sent to do that. And we also see the other slaves having kind of this weird relationship with her at first, because she comes from this time period where white and black people are way more equal, and she speaks like a white person, and she is educated.
They say several times,
and that's something that the slaves in the book and even the white people in the book are like, this is not right. Like, you should not be talking like that. You will get in trouble.
She wears pants. She dresses like a man. The whole thing is so foreign to their whole, like, concept of existence that it's scary to them.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think, like, you know, like Chelsea was saying, it's an own voices thing. Seeing a story about slavery written from the perspective, not of a slave, because Dana is very much not a slave. That's emphasized throughout. Like, she does not think of herself as a slave. She has choice. She has agency. And as
a character, she is incredibly brave. Yeah. She does that in times where I don't know if I could do that. She asserts her freedom and her independence.
But not that the other slaves can't do that and don't have choice, but that they, you know, they're forced into this system and she has a way out that they do not. But it's still written from that perspective. She is able to see from their perspective, and it's not written from a... Like, this story could have been written as a Kevin time travels and sees the injustice and helps them out. But no, it's written from Dana's perspective, going back as a black woman and going into that society, which made it a very, very different experience than, you know, any other, like, a white perspective on slavery or racism.
Although I will say the portion of the book where Kevin and her are separated, the thought of being Kevin in that scenario, I will say I think Butler did a really good job creating that tension. And when the two of them reunited, that dichotomy of it having been so long for him and so short for her, and the kind of culture he was stuck in, I thought she made that relationship function really well, given the obstacle they had to overcome. It's like,
absolutely.
You know, it's not realistic is not really the word you use for a time travel slave narrative, but I imagine, should it be realistic, that is how that would play out.
I think she did a really good job of making it seem very authentic, even though it's made up. It was
I liked
easy
Kevin.
I liked
he was
Kevin.
like the only non-slave character, and Dana. The two of them were the only good characters in this book. I hated Rufus so much. Oh,
everybody
Rufus
else
is everything
is
that's wrong with, like, white misogyny. I just hate it so much.
So shall we look at the characters and go through some of the things they did? We talked a bit about Dana.
Let's do that.
And a bit about Kevin, but let's talk about Rufus for a while. So Rufus is the kid that she goes back to save. he is a child of a plantation owner. He has owned slaves since he was born, and he is in love with Alice, who is a slave. And they were friends when they were little, and then he becomes just kind of sexually and romantically attached to her, even though she has no feelings for him.
Yeah.
But to him, she is a belonging. She belongs to him. It's
So
very
icky.
weird.
It's so bad.
Oof.
Okay, it's so bad, you guys. So here's my thing. It's so easy to say that Rufus is a product of his time. Like, usually that is an argument that I will call bullshit on so fast, but this is specifically a novel about how your context can shape who you are, like, as a person. Because we see Rufus go from this child, and Dana's trying so hard to shift his viewpoint and kind of de-racist him as much as she possibly can, but at the same time, she's not there all the time, and he's still in this context. But, like, here's the thing. So many guys, so many people that I know will still use that same, like, I am a white dude, so you are my property, and I will make decisions for you. That reading this book still felt so... Like, it's not slavery. It's not slave ownership. To compare it to that would be insulting. But at the same time, it is still this sense of entitlement that reads through Rufus that makes this book feel so incredibly contemporary. And the way that he speaks to her and tries to own Dana, even though he knows he doesn't own her, just smacked so close to home for me that, like, yeah. I didn't. Rufus, you and I are not cool.
Yeah.
That's not acceptable.
Yeah, it's problematic because there are times in the novel where he tries to do something good because Dana tells him, like, you should consider this third thing. Like, you should think, oh, I don't have to be this white man owning slaves who is horrible to everyone just because that's how my father is. And his father is the one who shapes him the most in the novel. Even though Dana is popping in, she's only there for a few months at most. And she cannot shape this child as much as she would like to. And ultimately it ends up that Rufus is horrendous, and he does get to the point where he ends up buying Alice back after she's tried to escape with her husband, who is also black. And he does not buy the husband back. He lets the husband go so that he is able to have Alice for himself. And you know, at that point, I think he was committed to being a dick in my head. And I was like, you know, you've made the choice now that you're going to buy this woman back instead of trying to figure out some other option. And there were other options for him because he's a wealthier enough person that he could have done something different in that scenario.
Well,
but he didn't.
And that whole scenario is like his fault. Like, he gets the shit kicked out of him by her husband because he tried to rape her.
Exactly.
He did rape her.
Like,
he
he did rape
exactly.
her. And so, like, obviously her husband tried to kick the shit out of him, but because he's white, he ends up raping her and then being able to purchase her and own her and keep her around just because he can.
Yeah.
And it's just dominating power structures are the
What
worst.
gets worse is the bit in there where he's talking about why he raped her because she kept saying no. Like,
and he just loved her so much, and she just wouldn't say yes, so he just had to do it.
There was no other option. What was I supposed to do?
Awful.
Oh,
like,
God.
Yeah, it's just not an option in his head that she could say no.
Yeah.
And because at that time, that's the way slavery was that people who were slaves did not have that option. They should look up to and appreciate and understand everything about the white people and the culture and whatever.
Yeah. And they should
and
be
everything
grateful
that they
for
get
being
from
a
it.
slave
Yeah.
to Rufus. You know, it's better him than
Yeah.
some other person, which is true in that time. Like, there were people who were better than others, but I think Rufus is not the best person out there. We can fully say that from seeing Kevin going back into this world, and we see Kevin later on helping people who are slaves to escape in the 5 years he's trapped there. That's what he does.
But how limited his ability to do that is quite showing, because you know, the whole product of society thing, she does go into that. Dana talks it through in one point when Kevin is there as well, and she's worried about him not being able to come back with her. If he gets stuck there, he will be affected by that society. And she talks about how easily how worrying she found it that she so easily started to fit into that culture. How it became understandable, how agreeing with the white people and becoming this subdued, polite, like simpering, sort
submissive
of
person.
Like she did that because it was necessary to survive. And Octavia Butler talked about how she wanted to counter this narrative of how people in the olden days, the black people of the olden days, were being accused by the young people in the like Black Power movements of the 1970s of like being too submissive and complicit. And she wanted to like illustrate the importance of survival, where you had no other option. This was your only way of doing it. Like it was death and beatings, or you do what you're told. And the ease, once you get into that, and once the whole rest of society functions like that, how impossible it is to think any other way, to get out any other way. And even Kevin finds himself trapped in it. He was obviously, when he gets out, he's exhausted and...
Yeah, I was saying that was so heartbreaking because it happened not to the extent that Dana was afraid of it, but... she was spot on in saying that him being trapped there for 5 years and returning from that, his context had changed and he had to take that time to get used to and reacclimate to not just the little things like technology and all of that, but the way to interact with Dana and with his own morality in such a sudden shift of, 200 years from past to present. And that's with Kevin being the good guy, the best guy that we're given an example of, and he still needs that time to shift and reacclimate. So it's definitely those were some of the conversations I enjoyed the most. Elizabeth, were the ones kind of about quote unquote mammies and that kind of conceptual difference of how one fights power and how sometimes being not submissive, but it's a form of defense to not call attention to yourself or to go along to get along.
Well, I mean, she actually illustrated like the figure of the mammy in a character called Sarah, who is the cook. Yeah. She runs the cookhouse, and I thought she was a fantastic character because she was very much, she even said in another household she'd have been called mammy. She was called Aunt Sarah by the white people and the other black people. And she's big and jolly and sweet and says yes ma'am and whatever, but actually in the privacy of the kitchen she is strong, she's firm, she hates the masters, like she swears
and
about
she's
them.
got good reason to hate the masters.
And she's surviving there and keeping her head down because 3 of her children have been sold, and there's always, they say, they left her just enough, just one child to hold on
keep
for.
Her making the work and carrying on.
And she says the culture understands a lot about torture.
And I just think it's so interesting because kids play such a strong part in this book, both the fact that Rufus and Alice's child is the impetus that Dana has to continue to protect Rufus because that is her future, ancestor or whatever. That's where the time travel gets a little wibbly wobbly and I just don't want to think about it. But so between that child and all of the children that are sold out, whether it's Sarah's children who are sold and that creates Sarah and her source of power, or whether it's Rufus pretend selling the children but not really selling them, and that causes Alice to end her life and ruin the rest of what existence she had. It's just so interesting that kids play such an important bargaining chip and power structure for the novel. I just thought that was interesting.
Probably so reminiscent of the time, like the amount of situations that happened where people were stuck because of their kids being threatened. I can only imagine it was nearly everyone.
That's a different, I mean, it's one thing to beat somebody, it's another thing to take someone's children and sell them forever.
Yeah.
Never to be returned.
Yeah. So, do we want to talk a bit about the time travel and the way it's framed as a science fiction story? We've got the connection between the modern era and the old era, and she is moving between the two, so this is generally called a science fiction story, but I know you've obviously intimated you have thoughts on this.
I was gonna say, my hesitation to call it a science fiction novel is only because the science is not explained or mentioned in any capacity. And like, I'm not really a hard science reader, so I don't have a very high bar for the level of science in my science fiction. But this to me almost felt more like a history AU or some kind of almost fantasy story that just happened to operate.
I was gonna say, I would
with science, like with time travel,
like a historical fantasy to me.
Fantasy,
That's what it comes across as to me. And yeah, it does have time travel, but it isn't explained in the slightest, and it very much happens randomly,
like magic,
and
like it's,
there's no explanation whatsoever.
Butler has described it as a brutal fantasy, which I think is a very good description. And I
agree.
also don't need science to be super accurate or sciencey.
Yeah.
But what I find interesting is time travel was an element of fantasy until time machines became a thing, and then it kind of moved into being an element of science fiction.
Yeah.
And now it's become one of the tropes that make up the genre, which is why this is classified as sci-fi. But actually, there is no technology or science behind this time travel, so it just as equally works as calling it a fantasy.
Well, it's interesting because like I have a series that I've read, which is a kids series. It's called The History Keepers, and it is exactly that. It's a time travel fantasy. There's no logic, no explanation, no time machine. And I love it. It's a really good series, by the way. But yeah, it's definitely what I would class as fantasy, and I think this falls into exactly the same bracket.
I mean,
as that.
she's not messing with time, so it's not even affecting time, because time, obviously, as a concept, is physics, which is science, and thus we have the thing.
Yeah,
but
it is too early for the physics of time conversation. But yeah, that's why this is it's. Because there is no time alterations, like the timeline and the linearness of time isn't altered or like functioning different in any way, it felt almost more like a portal fantasy to me, where the portal just happened to be
into the past.
You know, the emotional state of Rufus and happened to lead to the same place every time.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, so that to me is almost more, or like, you know, so that's, I just would not call this science fiction. It was amazing, and I think that calling it dark fantasy and difficult fantasy is definitely pretty spot on, because it's definitely brutal. I just would not have necessarily called it science fiction.
Yeah, it's speculative fiction, shall we say?
Yeah.
Let's use the
Just why it's on our show.
Yeah.
Which is why we're talking about it here on our Speculative Fiction Book Club.
Yeah, and I think also as a science fiction book, as a, you know, you can call it that, and it connects to her other works of science fiction, which are more explicitly sciencey, like the Xenogenesis story, which continues exploring race and gender relations, but in the context of aliens and you know, genetics and things like that, which makes it so much more sciencey, but it's
much more explicitly.
But it is very connected to this idea as well. It has these ideas about survival and about how you function and your freedom of choice and will and what that means. All these things are continued in Xenogenesis, and I would thoroughly recommend it.
Yeah.
I will pick it up.
I would also recommend, because time travel books are not my thing, as I've already indicated, the science and the physics of time and how time travel affects that is usually just too much for my brain. I prefer my time travel a la the Octavia Butler style. But if you are wary on time travel books like me, this might be a good one to check out, simply because it accomplishes traveling in time without getting anywhere near the actual like implications of physics and time and space that harder sci-fi gets into when it discusses time travel. So
Very
now,
true.
before we conclude on the Kindred thing, Would anyone like to comment on the
we didn't even talk about the ending
of, the ending and also the intersections of gender and race in this, because this is the Lady Vaults. We should be talking about the fact that it was a lady who does the time traveling, who is our main character, and
Indeed.
B, the other women in it and what that tells us about women and all that sort of stuff. Because I found it really fascinating.
Does this book pass the Bechdel test?
Yes, many, many times.
I mean, there's lots of women talking. Yeah, I guess they spend lots of time not talking about Rufus.
Yeah.
Not talking about
they
the
talk
owner
about
and stuff. Yeah.
escape and children and
Yeah.
food and...
And not that that's necessary to be considered, a lady-friendly book, but that's just that's my first usually rule of thumb that I go by. But anyway, yeah, I think it's interesting to me that we have, like you said, the woman doing the time travel. That puts the male in this kind of damsel in distress-esque position of he can't do anything without her. Like, he's stuck there without her. He needs her to get him home. But then it's also interesting because when Dana is alone on the plantation, although she's free and powerful and eloquent and educated, she also is not at the top of the power structure within the plantation lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely.
She kind of is outside of it because she comes and goes, and they are aware that she's from a time that's like not their time. So she's in this interesting kind of nebulous place within the plantation life, and even though she's black.
Well, and also it shows very well like the layering of that power structure is gendered as well as like racially segregated, because whilst Dana is a woman, she's also a black woman, so she's right down in the slaves, and you see it even amongst the interactions of the children. There's a point where the children are playing a game pretending to sell each other as slaves, and the boy like pushes the girl when she says something. He pushes her and says, "You shut up," because she's a girl. You're not allowed to talk. And the women have it differently. They suffer differently than the men do. And then you see it in the White household.
That's what I was about to mention. Yeah,
Margaret suffers and has no power in a way that Rufus and his father don't experience. So it's like, it's showing you, the white woman doesn't have the same levels of power as the white man, but she's nowhere near down the power structure as a black woman. Their experiences of sexism are so different, and there's so many more layers going on than that, and I thought that was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and I think initially I was really unfair to Margaret, and I will, knock myself for that. That's coming from a very 21st century female place of privilege. But while it doesn't make it okay, I do think it makes it more empathizable to see why she would treat Dana in the way that she did, existing in this power structure where she had no power and no form of recourse over any of the people who were actually angering her and
like the only sort of thing that she feels she's got a hold on is her son, and then Dana comes into the picture, and Dana is the person that he wants to read to him at night, and Dana is the person that he finds interesting because she's from another time period and all of that stuff. So Margaret is just kind of left high and dry, and she tries to exist alongside her at first, and she's sort of like grateful that Dana's saved her son, and then the more times it happens, the more upset she gets by Dana's presence.
But
and Butler writes about how Margaret doesn't, Margaret has slaves to do her cooking and her cleaning and her mending, and she doesn't know how to read and she doesn't know how to write, and so she doesn't have anything to do or anything to be or any sort of power, and so it's she lashes out and exercises what power she has on the few people who are below her, which includes her her property, her slaves. And so it's just very, like you were saying, interesting to see how all those layers interact with each other.
Yeah, and it just shows you like what privilege she did have is over the race, but not over gender in any way. And it's just, it was just like, oh my god, the layers of awfulness in society. Oh my god, it's awful.
I know.
It was very, very
it's awful on every layer.
But it recognized the intersections, and I think that was really good for people who, you know, it's so easy to read a lot of books and just be like, oh yes, men, women, and then not see that. But it was so clear in this book to see that it was just really good. Okay, let's
Shall we discuss the ending?
Yeah.
Ugh.
Okay, so
I didn't like it.
Yeah,
So
the ending.
I'm just gonna put that out there.
The ending of the book,
I did not care
essentially,
for it.
what happens is she gets threatened to a point where she's, you know, fed up at this point. She's saved this guy so many times, and now he's like really threatening her life, and it's just...
Well, Alice kills herself.
Alice
like,
is dead.
let's go full spoilers. Alice
Okay.
kills herself to escape from
Alice,
Rufus.
yeah.
And then Rufus decides that Dana is a good replacement. He says they're two halves of the same woman. And so he will have her now and keep her, and she has to stay because she belongs to him.
No.
Yeah.
So that was
So
problematic.
she goes to gather her things, and in order for Dana to return to her own time, she's figured out that she has to cause herself harm. She has to put her own life at risk, and so she's headed upstairs to do that, to return to her own time. And of course, Rufus follows her and attempts to rape her because
That's what he does.
And so in the process of that, she manages to get the pocket knife she's brought from her time out of her bag and to kill Rufus, to murder him in self-defense.
Yeah.
And she does this, and, you know, he was coming at her, and she kills him, and so he is kind of sprawled out, and he's laying on her arm. And because he's now dead and she no longer has need to protect him, she's called back to her own time, except for the part of her arm that Rufus is laying on, which is apparently kept back in the 1800s, because when she shows up in 1976,
She's missing
her
half
arm
an
is
arm.
gone. Like, her arm has been amputated. And that's pretty much where the book ends. They go to the hospital, and then
It's
there's a
also
little
where
like
it begins.
epilogue
The
where
book
they like
starts off with that.
yeah, like that's the first scene we've seen, is them going to the hospital to
Yeah.
get her amputated arm fixed. And then there's an epilogue where they like do some traveling around the South and try and look for Rufus's grave and blah blah blah. But like it just like it just felt like we got this huge build up, and then like
Oh, I kind of liked
just
it.
ended.
I feel like I wanted a little bit more. Like, I didn't think the
I did too.
ending was bad. I just felt like it wasn't enough for me to feel, like, satisfied with the ending. I wanted a little bit more to go on between her and Rufus, and, like, for something a bit extra to happen in that time before she's pulled back straight away.
I
or
didn't
something
feel like there
to
was
go on.
anything more that could have happened between her and Rufus. Like, that was it. Like, he threatened to rape her.
No, I don't necessarily mean, like, between Rufus and her. Like, something in that world to happen before she's just pulled back. Like, I would have liked a little resolution with some of the other characters that we see, or something more to be developed with them, because then she's out of that world. She doesn't go back again.
I guess
That's
I just felt like she went from like thinking about and talking about killing him
to
killing
boom.
him within the span of like half a dozen pages. And I think that to me is where I would have been okay with a little bit more like expansion. And you're right, Elizabeth, I don't really know how it would have happened. I don't really know how like what else she could have added or done.
Instinctual.
But maybe
reaction.
if she had like kind of put that thought slightly more throughout the rest of the book.
That was
like,
throughout.
It's in there,
oh my god, that was throughout. From the very beginning, where she is threatened and cannot hurt someone because she's not, you know, she's not experienced that kind of threat before. And then throughout, she continually references, you know, whether she would have hurt him, you know, she would have stabbed him. At one point, she tries to, and the knife gets knocked away, and she can't do it. So it's happened multiple times. It felt like a logical build-up, but then I listened to this very, very quickly all the way through. So maybe I kind of picked up on that happening so fast as it built.
I think
I
think
don't
it is
know, 'cause-
indicated, but I think that Chelsea's right in that it does seem very sudden that she jumps to it. As like, I know it's a self-defense reaction, and she's like, well, there's nothing else I can do here. I'm going to die if this guy rapes me. It's gonna be the same as death. So she has to kill him
Well,
in
she has
order
the way
to
out
react to that.
because she's not of that time. If she'd been of that time and she was a slave, and the society, she had no way out of that society.
True.
Yeah.
She would have been, like, killed.
It would have been another
they
choice,
discovered
because
her.
when she talks to Alice about whether she'll go willingly to Rufus, she says, these are your choices. You go willingly, he does it anyway, or you run away and get killed. Like, that's it.
And Alice says, would you go? And Dana says, no, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
So
And
I think it's made very clear that Dana would rather murder Rufus or be dead herself than be raped.
Yeah.
Like, that is indicated. Like, that is the line at which she
But
draws.
that's the choice that everyone makes. That's your only
Yeah.
choices in that
That's
time.
true.
Yeah.
The interesting
I don't know. Maybe
thing...
it was maybe it was with the Alice thing, because that caught me off guard too. Like, I remembered it happening, but the way it's portrayed in the book, she just goes back and then like takes a couple steps to the barn and sees it.
Yeah.
It was just, there's no like build up. It's just there. Like, I had to go back and read the sentence a couple times to be like, wait,
It did happen very
what?
suddenly.
Like, did that just happen? So maybe that was what threw me off, and I just felt like from there we barreled forward at such a speed
it was
to
a
conclude.
very sudden ending.
Yeah.
What did we
Yeah,
think
and
about
so-
the arm injury and it being, because when she comes back it's embedded in the wall and crushed, and then she's injured and she has to have it amputated and everything, and that's where Rufus was holding on to her. So,
Yeah. I think that's just the part where the science got a little, I don't know, it just got weird. Like, we never really talk about the time travel or how it works, but then I couldn't help but wonder, like, why that? Like, why does him touching her have an influence on which parts of her
it
get
makes
to
for an
travel in
interesting
time?
start to the story.
yeah.
That's very true.
I think I saw it as, because he was the one controlling the time travel, his function was, he was dying and he thought he was dying, so he pulled her through every other time. He's actually dying this time, so he's holding on, and he's literally trying to hold on to her, so that I guess it was strong enough but weak enough that a piece of her stayed or something. But also, because I was an English literature student, the way I read it was she is affected and scarred by slavery. Like, literally, by living in that period, nobody escaped whole, living through something that brutal, and it's left the scars on her. But also, like, just, it's left the scars on society. It leaves them on Kevin, but then we see it reflected in the wider, like, contemporary society. Like, contemporary America is shaped by...
the racial
thing,
dichotomies and relations,
and they make the coin that Kevin has that he shows Rufus to show that the time travel's happening. He has a coin that's
the bicentennial.
It's the bicentennial coin, and they're talking about that kind of, the founding of America was during a period when slavery was legal, and you know, the racism they experience in contemporary society is a direct relation, and it's the scars that we all bear and whatever. Anyway, English literature.
No, I like
training
that. I think
makes
along
you
with
see...
that, you know, she has left a piece of herself there with him, which is the thing he has wanted throughout the whole of the book, was to be able to keep her in some way. So she has left a piece of herself in the past, and so has left her own connection to that time, both physically and then also, Elizabeth, metaphorically, kind of, as you were saying. And we all take our roots from a past that we, you know, that Dana gets to see and the rest of us won't, or at least haven't thus far. If you've time traveled, please let everybody know. Please email us and give us an indication.
Yeah. So that
Excellent.
was Kindred.
Yeah.
So that was, it's a heavy story, and there's definitely a lot to peel back, but I think this might be the pick that I have enjoyed the most thus far.
This is by far the one I've enjoyed the most.
Octavia Butler's
much-
writing is very, very readable. Like, even
It's
for
so
such heavy
readable,
things, it's so accessible, so readable. You just go in and you enjoy the story, even when it's, like, brutal as all get out. Like, it's so good, and it's so clever.
Highly recommended from all three of
Absolutely.
us.
Highly
I would
recommended.
say.
All right. Well, should we go ahead and announce the next pick, and then we can talk about what we're reading?
Yes.
Adios. All right. So who wants to intro our next
Caitlin
selection?
has the book, so... You
How's
should.
the book?
I
All
do.
right.
Yeah. So the next book we're going to be reading is Lynn Fluelling, and the book is called Luck in the Shadows. Now, we hear rumours that this is, or has, gay relationships within it, so this is why we've chosen it, really. It sounds like a fairly stereotypical kind of fantasy story about a young boy called
That's all right.
Alec. Alec of Kerry, because everyone has to be of a place in fantasy. He's taken prisoner for a crime that he did not commit, and when he's in prison, he meets a cellmate who is called Seragrill of Rimini, and, you know, exactly. It's very, like, funny names. They make me laugh. But apparently this cellmate
it's not
offers him
Flar, so.
something, so he offers them a way to get out of prison and do something that is very much a sinister plot, and their fortunes are very unpredictable from that point on. So it definitely sounds like a sort of stereotypical fantasy.
Yeah. But isn't the
But-
cellmate like a handsome rogue older
Oh
gentleman?
yes, of
Yeah,
course,
guys,
of course
I'm
he
so
is.
here
I'm
for
sure.
This shit so hard.
It says
I'm
he's a
already so
spy,
here for this
rogue,
so
thief,
hard.
and a noble. So
Of course
it
he
sounds
is.
Very
Those
exciting.
are all my favorite
He's
words.
just
so
everything. He's
Yeah, I'm
everything
ready
you would
for
ever
this,
need.
you know?
So I think it'll be a fun one. It's quite a long book,
Yeah.
so you probably want to start it early in the month and read it for a while, because my copy's like 470 pages.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
it's a chunker.
it should be a
Ooh,
good one to
buddy.
discuss.
All right.
So
Excellent.
hopefully we'll enjoy it. So join us.
Oh,
Join us for that one.
Yes. Yep.
And we will discuss it next time.
All right. And then, so I think that about wraps us up, except for what we have on the go at the moment. What are you ladies reading? What's going on? What's on the nightstand, so to speak?
I am currently reading, I just started both of these, so I'm not very far into either of them, but I just started reading Revelation Space by Alistair Reynolds, because this month I am doing a sci-fi month, and I'm trying to read loads of sci-fi.
Well done, Kaitlin.
Yeah,
Well
I know,
done.
I'm pushing the boat out, trying to be different from fantasy. So I'm reading some Revelation Space, which I'm enjoying so far, but I'm not that far into it. I just finished reading Revenger by Alistair Reynolds, and I really liked that, but I think that was a bit of an easier one than this one. So we'll see. And then I'm also reading Foreigner by C.J. Cherry, because I also want to read some female science fiction writers. So reading
She's
both of
definitely
those.
somebody we should probably read for a Lady Box in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very true. So
She's
those are the
definitely
two
on the
I'm
short
reading.
list.
I wanted to ask you guys, I know that there is a readathon happening in October called the Own Voices Readathon. I haven't got anything really chosen for it, which is very bad, because sci-fi I find a little harder to find Own Voices books in. But I don't know if you guys have anything that you're reading for the month of October, Own Voices, and you want to like throw that out there as well as what you're currently reading, just in case anyone is sort of wondering what they could pick up.
I am reading, or I'm getting ready to start, Nalo Hopkinson,
Oh yeah.
Midnight Robber, and she writes very kind of surreal. It's like a sci-fi fantasy blend, and she brings in a lot of like Afro-Caribbean mythology and that kind of stuff.
It's very cool.
It reminds me so far a lot of Lagoon.
Oh yeah.
In that it kind of brings in that African, like folklore-esque kind of feel into a science fiction universe. So that's one thing I haven't started yet, but I'm planning on reading for October.
Sounds good.
And then also the People of Color Destroy Horror special edition just came out from the Lightspeed Kickstarter. And so I'll probably be reading that this month because it's October, which is Halloween, which is all my horror reading. It is horror story month, and I'm
your
so
month.
excited.
Yeah, I would.
Oh, I'm so excited.
Yeah, I would say Nine Fox Gambit, which I just read by Yoon Ha Lee, would work quite well.
I'd
Also,
pick that one
any
up, actually. I
of
might read that.
Aliette de Bodard's Zuya universe short stories. You find them in different magazines, but she's got them all listed on her website. They are all set in interesting futures, sci-fi futures, filled with, diverse cultures and stuff. And I just thought of something else that I've now forgotten. Oh, basically anything by Nnedi Okorafor, any of her
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
like Lagoon, The Book of Phoenix, they're both explicitly sci-fi and very, very, focused around African history and culture and stuff. So very cool.
If you have somehow not gotten to the 5th season yet, this might be a good month to pick that up in.
Perfect,
That's also a good
perfect.
one. That's a good one.
Excellent suggestions.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, so what are you, I know you're not, what are you getting ready to start, Elizabeth?
Yes,
what do you have getting ready to start?
I always manage to finish like 2 or 3 books in the same day and then have nothing reading when we're starting to podcast. So I am about to pick up Binti by Nnedi Okorafor, which is sci-fi
Good choice.
and so I somehow haven't read it yet, and it's very short, so I'm quite excited. And then I think I'm going to read Imprudence by Gail Carriger because it's finally time to read
good
it.
times.
It's been out
Good
too
choices.
long.
Very
So
good
those are my
choices.
good choices.
Wonderful. Well, yeah, and then I am reading the first October Day novel by Shayna Maguire, Rosemary and Rue.
Nice.
It's fairies, and this is a very long time since I've read a series like that that's like the same person, but each book is just a different set of circumstances in the same world. It's been a while. And then I'm also listening to Connie Willis To Say Nothing of the Dog, which is lovely and British and rompy, and they are playing croquet, and
delightful.
there are simpering baby talking characters who I hate more than anything in the entire world.
Yeah.
Excellent.
But shout out to Kay Taylor Ray on Twitter, who is my darling and who recommended both of those things to me.
One of
She
my
is-
favorite people.
Yes, she is a queen, lady, nerd, and fanfic wrecker and book knower, and I'm a big fan of hers, in case you can't tell. So she recommended both of those to me, so I am enjoying them both immensely.
Yes.
So, and that's it, guys. That's
That's
show
it.
number 5.
Woo.
We're done. So thank you guys so much for joining us. Join us again in a month.
Leave us all
for,
your comments about Kindred.
Yep, let us know. Hit us up on Twitter, YouTube, the WordPress, wherever you're at. Let us know. We're always here to talk about the Lady Vaults. And we'll see you guys in a month for Luck in the Shadows.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.